I've been thinking a lot lately about a beautiful poem by Pádraig Ó Tuama called The Pedagogy of Conflict. If you don't know Pádraig Ó Tuama, he's a wonderful poet, but he also is a conflict mediator working for nonviolence throughout the world. And he comes from Northern Ireland, where the conflict between the government and people on the streets was not unknown. In his poem, The Pedagogy of Conflict, he notes that when he was a child, he was taught to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But then he goes on to write that lately he's been counting lives, and so he counts 1 life, 1 life, 1 life, 1 life, 1 life, because each time is the first time that life has been taken. I've been thinking a lot about Pádraig Ó Tuama's poem these days, because although there have been many deaths at the hand of police over the last decade, it feels that we are in a new place now. And so I've been counting lives. Renee Good, 1 life. Alex Jeffrey Pretty, 1 life. And because I am the bishop of the Diocese of the Rio Grande, I'm also aware that there have been 4 deaths in the detention center here in El Paso, Texas. And so I count Francisco Gaspar Andres, 1 life. Victor Manuel Diaz, 1 life. Geraldo Lunas Campas, 1 life. Luis Gustavo Nunez, 1 life. I've also been thinking a lot about hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is defined on the internet place that I looked up as the practice of claiming to have moral standards or beliefs which one's own behavior does not reflect. Hypocrisy is saying one thing and doing another. Sending masked men with guns and pepper spray into the streets where the videos show over and over again aggression on behalf of the government towards those who are exercising the freedoms of speech and assembly to speak out against a government that's supposed to be by the people, for the people. I've been thinking about hypocrisy lately. And I've been thinking also about integrity. Integrity is when we live lives where our beliefs and our actions are together, they're integrated, they are one. In the spiritual practice, we always talk about integrating your life. You don't live one life at church where you put on a false face and then live another life out in the business world or out in your neighborhood. We need to talk about integrity. How we as a nation in a time of tremendous conflict can walk the talk of what we say we believe. And if we are Christians, that means we've got to go deeper in moments like these to explore what do we really believe, and then to figure out how do we act based on those beliefs so that there's integrity in our lives, not hypocrisy. If you are working as an agent of the federal government, as a member of the National Guard, if you are working in law enforcement, I encourage you in particular to read the Gospels of Jesus Christ. I believe I will start from the place by believing that you signed up to protect and serve your community. And I ask that you dig deep and act with integrity. I know that there are those working in the detention centers that are trying to see everyone as a human being. I believe that there are law enforcement officers that are doing their best to act with integrity and love for their neighbors by protecting us from crime. Those of you that are in the system have an even greater responsibility to make sure that the system reflects the values of this country. And I know that in times of tremendous violence and stress, it's easy to lose your head. We need integrity. If you have integrity, you're not afraid for your actions to be seen and recorded. If we have nothing to hide, then why are we hiding? And as I've been thinking about hypocrisy and integrity, I've been reading my Bible, and I'm reading that passage where Jesus says, "Be sure you take the log out of your own eye before you try to take the sliver out of your neighbor's eye." We, in the spiritual practice of the Christian faith, believe that the first thing to do is confess our own sins, not to first confess the sins of others. And so this is a time of self-examination. Where do I have hatred in my heart against my fellow humans? And how can I ask God's help to help me live a life of integrity based on the very nonviolence I am calling on others to proclaim and to live? What are we to do in times like these? I've been thinking a lot about the Edmund Pettus Bridge lately, the civil rights movement. A few people were called to walk across the bridge. They discerned this for themselves. They trained for it. They trained how to be nonviolent in the face of aggression and fear from the government. But they were not the only ones. There were others who cooked meals and picked people up at the bus stops and opened their homes for people to sleep on couches or on the floor. There were people who drove them to the bridge. There were people who prepared food for them afterwards. And those that were jailed, there were people that visited them in prison. The movement was much larger than just those talking heads that you hear about, because all of it matters. Everything that we do matters. When we act with integrity, that matters. And so what can you do? If you're like me, you've been wondering, what can I do? And I want to assure you, if my voice matters to you at all, that all that you do matters. If you're a person of faith, I encourage you to go back to your sacred texts. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, read the gospel. Remember that Martin Luther King, in preparing people, wrote in a card that said, "Before you march, meditate on the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth." So if you're a person of faith, if you're a Christian, read the Bible. Make a commitment to read the Gospels. Maybe start in Mark and go all the way through. Just read them, so that the life and work of Jesus of Nazareth, who we proclaim to be the Son of God, centers your life. We've got to have strong roots in a moment like this. I want to also encourage you to pray. Pray to God. Examine your heart. Spend time with the Creator of the universe. Your prayer matters, especially when it is done in secret and nobody knows. But it also matters that you show up to church or synagogue or your mosque, show up with community so that you can love your fellow human beings. Being together and remembering what love looks like and feels like is absolutely critical today. Love your children and your loved ones so that you understand the loss of the lives of those other parents. It is by maintaining our human connection and bonds of love that we don't get sucked up in the hate and the violence and the terror. Terror requires us to hunker down, to be afraid to speak, to be afraid to act. Love requires us to reach out in love for our neighbors, even those who disagree with us. There's lots of common ground, but we have to be on solid ground before we can reach out with integrity. Whatever it is you do, let's do our best to do it with integrity, to practice our most deeply held beliefs. So I encourage you to read the Bible. I encourage you to pray to God. I encourage you to gather with your loved ones. I encourage you to treasure the love that is in your life and to work so that everybody has that security, freedom, and love which we all deserve as people made in the image of God. And it might not hurt to also read the Constitution of the United States. Focus on the Bill of Rights. What matters is the integrity of our actions in moments like these. Pray. Meditate on the life and work of Jesus. Walk in love, my friends, and keep the faith.